morning. My name is Kelly, and I am the pastor here at Edges. And I'm just so grateful to be home. If you're visiting with us for the first time today, that's good. You and I came back together. I've been out for almost 3 weeks. And I just want to start by saying how grateful I am for a community of people who just pitch in and help out. And it's a reminder to me that none of us is indispensable and that team is what it takes, and that this is a place where that is true. So I'm grateful for the folks who've helped to lead our worship and who've let me have some time for rest and respite. And I just can't tell you what it's like to know that home is the place you most want to be. This past week I was at the beach, and I'm not a beach lover, but I loved the people I was with, and I loved the fun that we were having. And at night we would go out and chase crabs, and they were like SpongeBob crabs. I mean, exactly like Mr. Krabs on SpongeBob, running all over the beach, and they were playful, and until we would come upon them, and then they were afraid, and they would run around us, and they would turn over on their backs, and they would do whatever they could because they felt scared or indisposed or shy or whatever it was they were feeling, to scram right back to the water because it was their home. It was where they were the safest, and that's how I feel about you. That's how I feel about this community. Like I got to go back to my water. So I'm grateful for that. We're in the middle of a series over the past several weeks. It's called Quotable, where we're looking at things that people say often, wondering where they come from, and most importantly, wondering whether or not we believe them. And so today we're going to talk about a phrase that's often used when bad things happen. Specifically, we're going to think about what is it that we do or think or say when bad things sometimes happen. Surely that's one thing we all have in common. Sometimes in life, bad things happen. The easiest entry example I could think of is when this particular family member of ours realizes that he's getting a fresh cold. I don't know how many of you have ever had a fresh cold, but 100% of the time, this bad news will send this particular family member into an all-out panic. And then a tizzy manifests as an investigation of his surrounding community. Who touched him yesterday? Who brought Kleenex into a meeting that he was in? Which of our children have been harboring a germ and then smuggling it onto the kitchen counter on purpose so he would catch it? What I'm telling you is that this family member, fixating on the question, why am I sick right now? But knowing it's a futile effort to try to answer the question, why is he sick right now? He will settle for finding someone to blame. It's as if he thinks his cold will be cured if he can just sleuth out the carrier. Like an answer is going to be an instant antibiotic or something. He fixates. So this example, though kind of foolish, is relevant for today, I think. It's a caricature of sorts for what actually happens when we get something in life that we weren't expecting and we didn't want. In a futile effort to understand why we've just gotten the thing that we didn't want, one pattern is to conduct an investigation for someone to blame. That's why I think this week's quotable phrase is a staple of sorts. I bet all of us have heard it, and most of us have said it. When real, horrible, hard, confusing, deeply conflicting things happen, which they do all the time, we need a good response. We need something that will make us feel better, or at least something that will help us feel in control. So we take our best shot, which is often this common phrase. It's one way we grope for an answer, for a reason why, and for a who, if we can find someone in the picture. You got to guess what the phrase is? Good, we made a slide just in case nobody had a guess. Everything happens for a reason. See? Everything happens for a reason. Let me try to explain. Maybe I can tee up a few really real, but truly bad thing just happened examples. I'm certain you have many of your own. When a dear friend is diagnosed with final stage cancer. Or when someone we love gives birth to a child who will struggle for a whole lifetime. Or when the hardest working person we know cannot find secure employment. Or when the most compatible companion we can imagine suffers yet another painful breakup. Or when you or I get vetoed from the school or the opportunity or the relationship that represents our most tangible dreams. Or when there's an atrocity that makes it into a whole town's DNA and also onto the world news. Or when any inconceivable, unfair, you fill in the blank happens. Especially when it blindsides someone who looks for all the world like they did nothing to deserve it. Why in the world did it happen? And who is responsible? Everything happens for a reason. Do you believe it? Okay, let's start with a couple of questions. When people use this almost universal phrase, what's their goal? Or, what do we believe that makes us say everything happens for a reason? That's probably a great group question. Here at Edges, we often find our best sermons in groups with one another. So we just gather with 4 or 5 folks, make sure we know one another's names, and then talk about these questions out loud in a small group of folks. If you're brand new and you'd like to just listen for today, feel free. Or if you're not brand new and you'd still like to just listen, feel free to do that as well. Why don't you make sure you gather with a group of 4 or 5 people, discuss these questions for a few minutes, and then I'll call you back. Go ahead. All right, guys, take 30 seconds. Whoever's talking, go ahead and finish up. All right, here we go. You guys are getting a little bit better at calling yourselves back to order. That's excellent. Thanks for being willing to do that and to do it in groups. Most of the time, when people talk about something that they found that was real in worship, they found it through you. So it's really cool to watch that happen. All right, the question was, when people see or use this almost universal phrase, what's the goal? What do we believe that makes us say everything happens for a reason? What did you hear in your group? A sound bite that we need to hold. Because something's good's going. Okay. Okay, Cameron says that we are very often trying to use the phrase for a positive reason, but it's really just a simple cause and effect in the phrase, and that the phrase itself doesn't imply something positive necessarily. Okay. Okay, whether the things that happen to her matter in the whole grand scheme of things, and what God's involvement is, what God's perspective is versus her own perspective, can help you see that difference in perspective. A couple more. Okay, so we say it because it seems like it's a good thing to say, but maybe we don't always believe it or even know what it means. It just is sort of a common currency, like a universal phrase that we may all use. Okay? One more. Okay. Okay, so Bentley says it's our desire. It may be about our desire to have control over something, but he said that in his experience, he doesn't have control over what happens to him, only how he responds to it. It's the kind of thing that he has control for. But that perhaps we say it trying to offer or give control to folks. Now, it's tricky. You guys already pointed out lots of the complications in the phrase, everything happens for a reason, and what we believe or may not believe, how it may be received or said positively, or received or even said negatively to some people sometimes. So I agree with everything you said. Thought some of those other things myself. When we say everything happens for a reason, what we are most certainly trying to do is what Sarah said. We're trying to offer hope. We're trying to champion what Braden said, positive future outcomes to presently unfortunate situations. We're trying to say that even terrible things can be good teachers. That no matter how hard or dirty or dark it might be, there will surely be some diamond in the rough, like Carolyn said. Furthermore, as people of faith, maybe we're saying we should be looking for the reasons things happen, or for what we can learn from them, as you said, even looking to see how God is involved in them. Surely that's what we're trying to do. Surely that's how the phrase became almost universal. Everything happens for a reason. Well, sometimes that sounds like more like what Cameron said, like everything happens on purpose. Everything happens for a reason. Everything happens on purpose, which means, like Luke said, somebody initiated it. Everything happens on purpose and someone initiated it. Someone is responsible for it. Someone did it on purpose because they thought it was a worthy or useful idea, and they set it into motion in real time inside a human life. Who has that ability but God? So, a natural but often inadvertent conclusion may be that God makes everything happen because God has a reason. Take a quick silent assessment. How's that settling with you so far? That God makes everything happen because God has a reason. Well, I'm certain that what we are most certainly never trying to do with everything happens for a reason is to harm people we care about by suggesting that they were somehow selected for specialized doom. There's a reason this is happening to you. And it's to say that you were chosen to have this calamity by someone who is capable of purposely altering your life story, who would import tragedy and then swoop in to save the day or make it all good, to teach you something invaluable that you would otherwise never learn. That is funny, but it's a pretty warped way of showing love or power, isn't it? So you can see how this phrase could be accidentally harmful, right? To say, for example, that end-stage cancer happens for a reason, that it happens on purpose, that terminal cancer happens to people we love because someone who reportedly loves them and who has power over them initiated it or is responsible for it, to suggest even inadvertently that the only one with the superpowers to set that cancer into motion would squish cancer inside a little life, this same one created in love, that this one who did it on purpose did so because they had a reason, because they thought cancer was a responsible, useful, worthy idea to try out on a human life for some undisclosed reason, some cosmic and or human gain. This should make all of us reach for a paper bag. This is a Hallmark card turned hand grenade. Every week I meet with people who believe everything happens for a reason, which many have translated as God did their tragedy to them. And they believe, or at least they want to believe, that God will fix it. It's the idea that you better dance with the one that brung you, even if in this case you hate the dance. But here's the thing. If the person believes that they deserved the bad thing, the result is often that they hate themselves. And if the person believes that they didn't deserve the bad thing, the result is often that they end up hating God. No wonder some of us trust neither God nor ourselves. So every week we come to worship not to hear what I think or even to hear what you think. We come to worship because we're interested in how we're thinking about life and also in learning how God thinks about life. And over the course of a long time and a lot of experience together, we find that God's thoughts really do become our own. They really do shape how we think. And Scripture, the Bible, is one window that we have through which we can see how God is thinking. So, does the Bible have anything to say that could help us confirm or deny the veracity of everything happens for a reason? In truth, we're going to investigate together, but I'll go ahead and stake my claim. I think it looks like Jesus thinks everything happens for a reason. Let's take a look at one conversation he had that I think is directly on point. The incident or the story is recorded in John's Gospel in chapter 9. You're probably going to want to see it for yourself, so it's on page something in your Bible that I forgot to look up. So I'll wait while someone else does my work for me and tells us what page John chapter 9 is on. Sorry? 106. Thank you. That's why it takes all of us. Page 106 in the Bibles that are on your tables. All right. Here's the story. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man who was blind from birth. Jesus' disciples asked, "Rabbi, who sinned so that he was born blind, this man or his parents?" And Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents. This happened so that God's mighty works might be displayed in him. While it's daytime, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. When I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After he said this, he spit on the ground and he made mud with the saliva, and he smeared the mud on the man's eyes. Jesus said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went away and washed, and when he returned, he could see. So we have a difficult, hard, inequitable story here. I'm going to leave it up on the screen while we analyze it for a little bit this morning so that you can see the passage as we talk about it. Anyway, the situation comes to light when Jesus and some of his friends bump into a man one day who can't see, whose eyes have never worked the way eyes are supposed to work. And Jesus' friends decide they are going to make Jesus make sense of this tragedy. They want to know who's responsible. See, just like that family member. Somebody to blame. In first century culture, though, it was common to think that bad things could be traced to the sin of someone, to something somebody did wrong. So they asked Jesus who they can pin it on. And they list everybody they can think of, everybody who seems to be already in the story. So first they say either he's a bad dude, the guy himself, and he was born that way, born a bad dude, or his mom and his dad screwed up so royally that God took it out on their baby boy years ago. It's either his fault or it's his parents' fault. And as you can see there, without much of a thought, it seems, Jesus tells them it was nobody's fault. He says neither the guy nor his mom or dad sinned. Now, if we stop there, it seems like Jesus is heading toward some things happen for no reason. Sometimes nobody is responsible. Unfortunate things just happen sometimes. Nobody sinned. But then Jesus says, this happened so that God's mighty works might be displayed in him. Uh-oh. This happened for a reason, and the reason is so that God can show how powerful God is. You just wait and see. Bad things happen for a reason, and God is responsible for them. Is there any other way to read that? And then to further drive home the point, Jesus gets all urgent and talks about how he better get to work while there's still light outside. Do you see it there? Now, think about that. I think it's a rather crass thing to say in front of somebody who only ever sees darkness. So he makes a muddy mask and he rubs it on the guy's eyes and he tells him to go and wash his face, and voila, the forever blind man can see. Look what God did. So that God could make a man see, God made a man blind. Everything happens for a reason. Does that turn anybody's stomach just a little bit? Is God really in charge of setting bad things in motion, even and especially when it's clear nobody's done anything wrong, so that God's mighty works might be displayed through them? What do we do when the Bible doesn't seem to make sense? Here's where I think it's a great idea to have some good tools for really reading Scripture, which, by the way, all of us can access. And I've talked about this before, and we're going to explore some of those tools together in a series that's coming up in just a few weeks. And I'm worried that on the face of it, you wouldn't be excited about it. But trust me, you are going to love it if you come. It's going to be a series about the Bible. I mean, just about the Bible. That's it? No, just that. So come, you're going to like it. Anyway, first we need to do some textual analysis with this scripture passage. If we go all the way back to the original Greek language, there are two pretty important considerations that we need for this text. The first is the fact that the original Greek doesn't flow well when it's translated. So the translators have added some things to help it flow, and I'll show you which those are. And the second thing is that there's a lack of punctuation in Greek. In our whole Bible story, we have the folks who were at the actual center of the stories. And then we have the ones who later wrote the stories down with divine help. And then we have the folks who still later messed with the stories that the folks wrote down about the stories who they actually happened to. These people out here are called the translators. And they were the ones doing the translating, putting in the chapters and the verses, which were not there originally, and the punctuation. And none of this was in the original texts. So take the story we read just a few moments ago from John chapter 9. First, let's see the actual words that can be taken from the original Greek before it was made to flow better in English. The first two verses are virtually the same. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man who was blind from birth. Jesus' disciples asked, "Rabbi, who sinned so that he was born blind, this man or his parents?" The next verse is where it gets tricky. Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents, but so that God's mighty works might be displayed in him." The part "this happened" is not in the original Greek text. But so that God's mighty works might be displayed in him. "This happened" is an innocent addendum, not in the original Greek. It's added to make the text flow. But since it's not there, let's take it out. Then you can read volumes about what is known as the hina subjective clause here. Hina is a Greek word. Simply put, there are two ways that the clause "but so that" appears in the original Greek. And both of these ways, incidentally, happen several times in this book we call John. So it can be a purpose clause where one thing is the result of another, like Cameron said. God made him blind so that God could show God's mighty works. Or it can be what's called a command clause, where one thing happens and it sets another thing in motion, more like what Braden said. Nobody sinned here, but that God's mighty works will be displayed in him. And then we get to see what happens next. Because remember, there's no punctuation. So both of these forms are common in the New Testament, and even, as I said, in the writing style of this story's author. So the next thing we have to look at is the problem of punctuation. And in the original Greek, not only were there no chapters and no verses, there was no punctuation at all. So in case you can't imagine how big of a deal this can be, I want you to take a look at this phrase and see if you can tell what it means. Yes, it looks like a text from my mother. So is this a love note to someone's honey? Hey, honey, dinner is on. Is a honey dinner on the menu? Hey, honey dinner is on. Is someone making a tiny trip? Just a little trip to the store. Or is the writer outing themselves or making up after a fight? I love you just a little. Punctuation and intention matter, and it's difficult to cobble together without loads of content, right? We don't have the context for this phrase. In the case of John 9, the question is whether we are being told the man was born blind for the purpose of revealing God's work in his life, or that he was born blind, and as a result of this, God has chosen to work in his life. And so we better get busy looking for how God has chosen to work. And we can see the next verse then. So punctuated in this way, the Greek would read more like this. Again, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who was blind from birth. Jesus' disciples asked, Rabbi, who sinned so that he was born blind, this man or his parents? Jesus answered, neither he nor his parents, but so that God's mighty works might be displayed in him, another comma. While it's daytime, we must do the works of him who sent me. Oh. Nobody did anything wrong, but we better get looking because God's going to do something with this. This reading suggests that while a terrible thing has happened, it was nobody's fault, at least not in this case. Now, I don't know whether we should go so far as to say that God doesn't author anything. But certainly in this case, we have to say that God doesn't author everything. While a terrible thing has happened, it was nobody's fault. And instead of sitting down on the curb and wondering why it happened, instead of fixating on what did I do to deserve this and who in the world is to blame for it, there is something else that can be done. Look to see. Be so focused on, be so determined that God is coming that we won't miss how God is going to come through for this guy. And quickly, no less. Now that is a word that has some life in it. That is a story that sounds like God to me. The idea that when bad things happen, we don't have to bail on ourselves or on God. That God is neither responsible nor afraid of our pain. That God will, though, rush in and offer a mighty and powerful response. Oh my, that is a game changer. Sometimes things happen and God shows up in them. Things don't happen so that God can show up in them. For me, and maybe for you, this slight tweak is just mind-blowing. It totally shifts my attention. Instead of fixating on the why and the who that are associated with bad things, it lets me be intent on looking for how our God will show up even through it. To trust that my God will not run away from it, even if that's all I can imagine doing. To believe that God will somehow bring life and hope and love if and when I am willing to have eyes to see it, even in the most terrible things. If you read on in the John chapter 9 story this week, which I hope you will, and by the way, if some of you or if any of you don't have a Bible, always feel free to take one off the tables. That's what they're there for. If you read the full story in John chapter 9 this week, there are 38 verses full of this story. You'll see that most of the people in the story refuse to see what's really happening. Even the boy's parents. And since they're so fixated on the why and the who, they miss Jesus. What a great lesson. What do we believe when bad things happen? How might that shape what we're focused on, what we say? How might it shape how we offer presents to one another? How might it change how we see God offering presents to us? So this morning I want to do something a little bit different. I want to invite you in the next few moments to simply sit, to listen, and to take in the words of a song. Often we have a song during our communion time, but today I want to invite you just to sit and fully be present for the song, for the words of it. And I wonder if you would hear the words of this song as a possible alternative to Everything Happens for a Reason. A possible conversation between God and you, either one of you the author of the words, or between you and someone else, either one of you the author of these words. And I wonder if you might hear it as just the truest thing we might be able to say, believe, or do. If our lead worshipers would come, I'll be back after the song.
Fix this.